Welcome to Look Ahead Radio with Tom Arms and Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints around the world this afternoon with Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio and Look Ahead News joining us every afternoon at this time. Just to reiterate something I've said on several occasions, we are pre-recording this now to accommodate his schedule, which allows him to get much-needed beauty sleep. It hasn't done him much good, I fear, but gives him some time to get some rest because it's midnight as you are hearing this program there in London. Well, midnight in London as we are hearing this program this evening here in coastal North Carolina. And with that, Tom, good afternoon, or actually good evening to you.
Good evening to you, Lockwood.
Now, we are experiencing daylight savings time. Does the United Kingdom have a daylight savings time by any chance?
2 more weeks, and then we have it.
All right, and then our clocks will be in sync as they were. Let's talk about the weather there in London before we get started.
Balmy, beautiful weather. I've got to get out and mow the lawn. I haven't done it yet this year, but it's calling to me.
Actually, your neighbors are calling to you, asking you to please cut your grass. All right. Tom Arms, of course, of Look Ahead Radio and LookAheadNews.com. And, of course, Look Ahead Radio heard every Friday afternoon here on the talk station. And Look Ahead News, well, simply log on to LookAheadNews.com. Get tomorrow's news today. Tom, so much going on around the world, and unfortunately insufficient time to accommodate it all, but want to go to some of the big issues that are taking place right now, particularly, and since we start the program in the United States, I'd like to just focus on the U.S. here for a few minutes. The events of the past week, the topic of course, wiretapping and supposed wiretapping of the president, also concerns associated with the CIA, the whole issue of security. What has been the conversation there in Europe related to our events here in the States? Are people still interested?
Oh, gosh, they're fascinating. I mean, it's reality television. Uh-huh. Trump has moved over from the network to the world stage as a reality star. There's several items which have sort of grabbed the headlines here this week. One is the taxes and the whistleblowing. Mm-hmm. The other is, of course, the wiretapping. They feel it looks like their analysis of what's coming out of Kellyanne Conway and Mr. Spicer, Sean Spicer, is there seems to be a retreat from Trump's tweet in which he called Obama a sick bad guy for tapping Trump towers. Mm-hmm. And then also there's been a bit of a kerfuffle about the fact that Mexican foreign minister turned up in town and nobody bothered to tell the State Department about it, which everyone here finds a bit, outrageously odd.
Right, it is. Well, the other aspect of it is that we're looking at the relations with Mexico here in the States as well. Let's start with the topic of the possibility of
and of course the travel ban.
Okay, yes. And
version 2.
Yeah, all right. So those have been big issues there in Europe. Question about the topic of wiretapping. Other than your observations, they seem to think that it's a retreat on the part of spokespersons for the president. Is there any interest in the fact that there might possibly be some reality to that? No, they don't believe it. I've noticed that next week the Congress is going to start hearings on the subject. Uh-huh. But everyone here, just like Trump talks about the so-called judges and the so-called media, they talk here about the so-called wiretap claims. Okay. So, all right. So there is no sense that this has any validity at this point. All right.
No, everyone makes much of the fact that nobody in the Trump administration has produced any evidence of any kind, and they find it amazing that people can make the claims without producing the evidence.
Well, there is, well, I shouldn't say there's tangential evidence, but a member of the press has expressed the fact that there were obviously wiretapping and or surveillance, shall we say, of members of the Russian entourage, the ambassador, in his conversations, and they recognize that obviously all of the candidates have had some conversation with foreign leaders and foreign representatives during the campaign.
The Russian ambassador wasn't running for public office.
Yes, but neither was, I might add, General Flynn. But that's beside the point. The fact is that apparently there has been some surveillance. But let's move on to other items. The issue of the taxes. And, of course, how is that being played there in Europe? And that's relatively a new topic, so may not have a lot of interest at this point.
It's being played fairly straight, that someone has come out and said that Donald Trump paid $38 million in taxes, but that he probably should have paid more, except he took advantage of the legal loophole, which the alternative minimum tax formula, and it's being played quite big that, in fact, he's trying to get rid of that. He's proposed getting rid of the alternative tax liability form, which sort of indicates that he would benefit from that.
Is it being played also that other businesses and other individuals have likewise benefited from this? For example, it notes here that MSNBC and Comcast paid less taxes than Donald Trump. I mean, major corporations that have...
No, I think the reason was because they're not president of the United States.
But, of course, he wasn't president when he was paying those taxes. I just make mention of that.
No,
okay,
of course not. That's certainly absolutely true.
Okay.
I think that... Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. He was not president at that time.
By the way, at that time was probably not really seriously considering being a president. Let's move on to a few other items very quickly. The issue of the travel, continuing a dispute over travel bans and immigration status and refugees. Again, how is that playing in Europe?
Well, we're all waiting, just as you are, for a judgment from one of the many federal courts which is considering version 2 of the travel ban.
Okay.
Most people think here that one of the courts will turn around and say, no, you can't do it, and that basically what Trump is doing, he's playing for time, if you like, until he can get Gorsuch onto the Supreme Court bench. And as I understand, the hearings start next week, and there should be 4 days of hearings starting Monday. And that he didn't really want to refer to the Supreme Court because he wanted to have his appointee on the Supreme Court before it was heard by the ultimate court in the land. So that probably is what will happen, because once it's turned down the second time, I can't see him amending it a third time. It'll probably be referred to the Supreme Court just in time for Neil Gorsuch to fill his seat.
Tom, I want to get to the topic of the European Union and several issues. We have, particularly of note, the issue of Brexit, which, of course, is the British exit from the European Union. And apparently that is now on the fast track. I understand that Scotland is possibly going to offer up yet again another referendum. And before we go to the break, I'm just curious, is Scotland in play as far as leaving the United Kingdom?
It's very much in play. Whether or not it will vote to leave the United Kingdom, nobody knows yet. It's up in the air. The thing is that they had a vote a year ago in 2015, and it was supposed to be a once-in-a-generation vote.
Yeah, but things have changed since then, and we're going to get back to that.
The goalposts have moved, because one of the reasons a lot of people voted to remain part of the United Kingdom is that there was some doubt over whether or not Scotland will be allowed to stay in the EU.
Right. Now, I want to get back to that in just a moment. I want to take a quick break here with Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and, of course, Look Ahead Radio. You're listening to Viewpoints Around the World.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
This is Tom Arms with LookAheadNews.com's expanded world analysis for the week beginning the 20th of March. Look Ahead broadcasts tomorrow's news today so that you can plan to participate. There will be celebrations in Rome and protests in London next Saturday. both with the same root cause, the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, which founded the European Economic Community. The EU heads of government will be celebrating the great European project past, present and future, and tens of thousands of Brits will take to the streets to protest against the Brexit referendum and Prime Minister Theresa May's apparent hard line on upcoming Brexit negotiations. Also in Europe next week, there will be a meeting on Monday of the Eurogroup finance ministers to discuss Eurozone issues such as the Greek debt and structural reform. All of the EU finance ministers will meet the following day, and European Central Bank governors meet on Thursday. The first televised debate of the French presidential elections are staged on Monday. The participants are François Fillon, Emmanuel Macron, Marine Le Pen, Benoît Hamon, and Jean-Luc Mélenchon. It will be the start of several important congressional hearings on Monday. The House of Representatives Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence starts hearings on Russian involvement in the presidential elections and President Trump's claim that the Obama administration conducted secret surveillance on Trump Towers. Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch starts confirmation hearings before the Senate Judicial Committee on Monday, and the Congressional Committee on Homeland Security will start hearings on President Trump's plans to beef up Homeland Security personnel to patrol the U.S.-Mexican border and increase deportations of illegal immigrants. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson on Wednesday hosts a summit of the 69-nation Global Coalition to Counter ISIS, while on the following day the fifth round of UN-brokered Syrian peace talks will be held in Geneva. President Trump, meanwhile, will seek sustenance with a political rally in the Trump heartland of Louisville, Kentucky on Monday. In South Korea, impeached President Park Geun-hye is officially questioned as a suspect in the corruption case that led to her ousting. While in Turkey, several high-profile journalists go on trial on Tuesday on terrorism charges. In a Cameroon courtroom, 3 English-speaking protesters faced the death penalty for demonstrating against plans to introduce French-only courts in English-speaking parts of Cameroon. Hong Kong holds chief executive elections on Sunday, the same day that a general election will be held in Bulgaria, where the main issues are Russia, Trump, Turkey, and immigration. And that was next week's News Today, so that you can plan to participate in the world around you. Stay tuned for Viewpoints Around the World with myself and Lockwood Phillips.
Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Tom, we were chatting a few moments ago about Brexit and the Scottish independence and the fact that Scotland once attempted to secede from the United Kingdom. Quick question before we move on to other issues associated with the European Union. And of course, this strikes me, Tom, as arguably the number one issue for the continent, and that, of course, being the European continent, and second only by arguably international issues with Russia and maybe Turkey. And we're going to get into the issue of Turkey here in a moment. But am I pretty accurate in saying that if there's any one hot-button item right now in your United Kingdom and in Europe, it is the European Union, and particularly the decision by the United Kingdom to leave?
Oh, yes. Brexit has put the cat among the pigeons.
Okay.
You know, it's set the ball rolling in all the wrong directions.
And then in the process, it means that even the possible breakup of the United Kingdom, we have both Ireland and Scotland in play, do we not?
Yes. No, that's absolutely true. And, of course, you know, that would not help the Conservative government. You know, they take us out of Europe, they lose us Scotland, they lose Northern Ireland. You know, that's not a very good record.
No, it's not. And of course, tell us about Prime Minister Theresa May. How is she standing up under all of this?
Well, she seems to be, you know, standing rock solid, you know, and not moving an inch, and saying as little as possible other than, you know, hold fast. I'm going to do the best I can for Britain.
All right.
So she's trying to project herself as a rock. At the same time, as a rock, you know, she's not very flexible.
Right. All right. But what about Parliament? There was some question as to what was going to happen with the Supreme Court there in the United Kingdom and Parliament. Are they at the point now where, quite frankly, there's no means of...
It's been voted. Article 50 has been finally approved by Parliament. The Labour Party effectively acquiesced, and Theresa May has gotten everything she wanted.
Let's move to then Europe, and particularly, I want to just touch on very quickly the events in both Netherlands and Germany. The Netherlands has an election here shortly. Am I correct?
It's today.
Today. Oh.
Yep. Yeah. We the big issue is just how well Geert Wilders' Freedom Party does. Mm-hmm. They're the alt-right party, as I think I've said in previous programs. Geert Wilders takes xenophobia to a new level. He wants to ban all mosques, and he's come on record as calling Muslims scum, and that Islam is not a religion, but an ideology from a retarded culture.
Is he still projected to do as well as was the case a week ago?
No, well, it's difficult to say. It's the last opinion poll showed him dipping a little bit, but it's difficult to tell. He's kept off the public stage. There have been various television debates, and he refused to participate in any of the debates until last night, when he actually debated with the Prime Minister Mark Rutte. And that's the only debate, and everyone, it's sort of a toss-up. Geert Wilders is a very good speaker. He's a very good orator. The odds went in favor of Mark Rutte, was the general opinion. A big issue in the debate and in Holland, running alongside the election, is the problems they're having with Turkey.
All right.
The Turks are calling the Dutch Nazis.
Right. And by the way, Turkey has threatened all sorts of reactions to the Dutch. What is the influence on the rest of Europe in this case? Because Turkey wants to become an active member in the European Union. They also are, of course, currently a member of NATO. And in light of the fact that Erdogan has is it premier or president? I'm always confused by that.
He's president.
President has arrested thousands, as
100,000.
But he's arrested thousands of journalists.
Yeah, no, 1,000 journalists, but 100,000 opponents have been locked up in preparation for a referendum on the 16th of April, which, if he gets his way in the referendum, it will give him virtually dictatorial powers. Now, the big problem with Europe at the moment is that there's something like 5 or 6 million Turks living in Europe. And traditionally, over the past few elections, these Turks have voted 6 to 10, that is 60% of them, in favor of his party. And he wants to hold rallies in Germany and France and Austria and Netherlands. He wants to hold rallies and address these Turks to persuade them to vote for his proposed changes to the referendum. But the Europeans don't like these proposed changes, and on top of that, they find Erdogan extremely distasteful. They're very angry with the way that he is locking up journalists, he's locking up judges, and everything else. And so they have said, basically, no, you can't. You can't have the rallies in our country.
Right. I was going to ask, why would he have rallies in there in foreign countries? They can't vote in those foreign, or can they vote in those foreign countries?
Oh, yes, they can.
Wow.
There's nearly 6 million Turks living in EU countries.
Wow.
And they can vote. And the Turkish government has worked very hard to maintain the links between the Turkish diaspora in the EU and Turkey. There's like 1,600 Turkish teachers paid for by the Turkish government to work in EU countries to make certain that young Turks, the children of these Turks who live there, learn Turkish and learn something about Turkish culture and everything else. And they are encouraged to be part of Turkish culture and to travel back to Turkey and vote.
That's a telling story Tom, it shows not a negative, but it shows how Europe sees itself as truly, if you will, a melting pot, but a very worldly environment. I do understand, as you tell me this, how Europe finds itself distracted or separated in some fashion with all the variety of cultures that have populated many of the Western European countries. So I want to get back to that in just a moment. We've got with us this evening Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and also of Look Ahead Radio, which is heard every Friday here on the talk station Tomorrow's News Today. You're listening to Viewpoints Around the World.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment. We now return to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms of Look Ahead News and Look Ahead Radio. And we're chatting with him about, well, his perspectives and what he's reading and seeing there in the press in the United Kingdom, but also in Europe as well. This is an important issue for us, the audience listening here, because this does influence both the U.S. image and actions around the world. So with that, Tom, we were chatting a few moments ago about the events in Turkey and the European Union, and you mentioned that Turkey has spent money actually teaching Turkish culture there and hiring teachers to teach young Turks who are living in other foreign countries, particularly in Europe, to maintain their Turkish relationship and culture. Let's talk here for a moment about the whole issue of Europe, and it's something that's relatively unique to Europe that we don't have here in the States. Now, we do have, cross-state communications, and you have those, some cultural differences, but they're very, very light compared to the significant cultural differences between, for example, Turkey and Germany.
Even France and Germany.
France and Germany, yes, that's absolutely right. Let's talk about the issue of how these countries are in the process of negotiating and what are they doing? Because this is, it's really tumultuous times there.
It's a very complex topic. If we focus just on Turkey, you have to remember that Turkey is European and Asian and has played a big part in European history. It was the big power. The Ottoman Empire was the big power in Eastern and Central Europe for decades and decades. It's one of the reasons why they had problems in the Balkans, was because half the population of the Balkans was Muslim and half was Christian. And as for there's this constant problem with Turkey because of it. And as for the fact that they had this sort of special relationship with Turkey, it's because of these really long historical and cultural links, and because at the back of everyone's mind is the possibility that Turkey will someday become part of the European Union. And so they give it a lot more leeway than they would, say, people from Syria when it comes to maintaining cultural links back with Ankara and Istanbul.
Right. And it's a major economic engine, too. All right, let's look at the...
and NATO.
And NATO, and a member of NATO, as a matter of fact. And at times, Turkey has been, if you will, the buffer between Russia, the old Soviet Union, now Russia, and Europe, and in fact, the Middle East. And, of course, Turkey plays a key role in that capacity still in the Middle East, does it not?
Yes, it does. And, of course, Turkey at the moment is going through a real political schizophrenia. It's not certain which way, under Erdogan, it wants to go. Does it want to become more Arabic or Muslim? Does it want to become closer to Russia? Or does it want to go down the path it's been pursuing for decades, which is closer links with the EU?
Right.
It really is at a crossroads.
And, of course, the issue of the Middle East still in a upheaval, and Turkey, of course, playing a major role in that in a variety of ways. Let's move on to another item here. I'm looking at this. Laying down negotiating lines in Europe. What are we talking about here?
Well, the Europeans, as Article 50 was invoked, they started actually putting down a few pointers as to the way things could go. And one of the things was that they offered EU citizenship to any Brits who wanted it.
Oh, my goodness.
If you want, wait a
second.
Want to have European citizenship, they've said they can have it.
All right. So pardon me for interrupting. European citizenship is seen as something that would usurp a member of
not replace, but in addition to British nationality.
Okay. What does European citizenship mean?
Well,
really,
it would give them the right to travel around Europe if they apply for it,
without the need of passport and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, obviously the British government has to accept this.
Uh-huh.
The other thing is, they want to start off the negotiations with acceptance of two principles. Mm-hmm. One is that EU citizens in Britain at the moment have the right to remain, and that British citizens in Europe have the right to remain in Europe if they so wish. Basically a tit-for-tat agreement, and that ends Mrs. May's bargaining chip, if you like, which she's been holding in reserve. The other one is that the EU is saying that Britain owes them about $70 billion, a bill to pay for leaving the EU. And that's money which Britain had committed to paying over the next 4 or 5 years towards capital projects in the European Union, which the EU would lose because Britain was leaving. Not just capital projects, but scientific development and things like that.
All right, and
they don't want the British to commit to a figure at the moment, but simply to the principle that there has to be some payment from the UK.
Let me turn the tables on this one very quickly with you, Tom. Again, Tom Arms of Look Ahead News and Look Ahead Radio, lookaheadnews.com, tomorrow's news today. Tom, how about the United Kingdom? There were expectations that the UK would be also making investments in its infrastructure and a variety of operations and systems. Now that the United Kingdom is leaving, or Brexit has been basically initiated, doesn't the UK lose some revenue and some benefits that would accrue to that country as under the old administration of?
That would all be part of negotiations. I think it's the acceptance that money is involved.
Okay,
it's that principle that the European Commission is asking the British government to accept. The principle. Now, the question of how much whether it's going to be net towards Europe or net towards UK. That's a lot of haggling that has to go forward. There's a lot of devilish detail there, but it's the principle that they have to discuss money.
All right. Now we've talked briefly about the events in the Netherlands, and of course we got Germany, France, Italy. We've also got the possibility of Hungary, other countries leaving the European Union. What about them? Will they be likewise penalized in some fashion? Does this set a precedent? Should another country, Netherlands being one that really seems to be pretty close to wanting to leave the European Union, would they be likewise penalized?
Quite possibly. Quite possibly. You see, if you think about it, Lockwood, basically the EU is committed to certain expenses going forward several years. They have to plan.
Right.
So if a country pulls out, like the UK provides 10% of the EU's budget, if a country pulls out, then it's going to put a heavier burden on the existing members of the EU until that expenditure is filtered through.
Well, that's to be expected, and I understand that. It's just that one would wonder if possibly the negotiations on the exit of Great Britain from the European Union might be used, if you will, to send a message to, I mentioned Hungary, we've talked about this in the past, possibly the Netherlands. There's some question as to whether Italy, or for that matter, even Greece, will stay in the European Union. is this a possible means of sending a message? Although, I've got one other quick question. Is this intended as a message? And the second question is, Tom, how do you enforce such a penalty in light of the fact that if the European Union, if the UK decides they're not going to pay, they're not going to pay? What's the enforcement tool?
Well, all that remains to be seen. But they could simply tie it to trade concessions. They can make the trade concessions or any trade agreement more difficult. Mm-hmm. And extract the money. I mean, how is Trump going to get money out of Mexico for his wall?
Oh, he's going to send them a check. I'm sorry, a bill.
Yeah, but how's he going to make them pay?
They'll willingly write that check and send it. It's a good question. No, it is. It is.
No, what he's going to do, he's going to take it out of other money.
Right.
And that's probably what the EU would do.
Wow. It is interesting, Tom. With world events taking place, we've got Russia, we've got situations in the Middle East still, then of course now with China and North Korea, which we're going to get to in a few moments ago here in the program. With all of those things still taking place, you and I are still today talking about Brexit and the impact of it, if not directly associated with the United Kingdom, but with other countries as well. Before we go to the break, is there some underlying fear that the whole issue of the European Union is flawed and either has to be fixed immediately, or is it a sense that this is just growing pains?
Oh, I think there is a fear of that. There's certainly a fear of that among the people like the UK Independence Party and about half of the Conservative Party here in Britain. Mm-hmm. And there's certainly, that's the feeling of people like Alternative for Deutschland and so forth. And however, I honestly feel that Europe has kept the peace, or the EU has kept the peace in Europe for 70 years.
Right. Well, it's okay. It is oriented towards an issue of
it's helped to keep the peace in the world,
right,
because of Europe's importance within the world structure.
Okay.
And Brexit has started breaking it up, and if it keeps doing it, and if we don't have proper negotiations which end properly and are conducted properly, it will have an impact right around the world.
All right, we're going to get back to that in just a moment. As a matter of fact, around the world, we're going to talk about several other issues. We're going to talk about Russia and its efforts and participation as well. You're listening to Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
Observations of an Expat by Tom Arms from LookAheadNews.com. Trump lost on Wednesday. I'm not talking about the court ruling on version 2 of his travel ban. Neither am I talking about the mounting incredulity over his wiretapping claims and tax returns. I'm talking about an event that took place 3,843 miles away from the White House on the other side of the Atlantic, the Dutch general election. Trump's man was Geert Wilders, the anti-EU, anti-immigration, racist leader of the Netherlands Freedom Party, who has bounced in and out of the Dutch courts on hate crime charges. There was never any question of Wilders winning a majority in Parliament and forming the next Dutch government. Their proportional representation system makes that a virtual impossibility for any political party. However, Wilders' Freedom Party was tipped to win more seats than any other Dutch party. He failed miserably, and he failed with 80% voter turnout, up 5.5% from the 2012 elections. The hope of President Trump and his alt-right eminence grease Steve Bannon was that a Wilders victory would be a fresh, stiff breeze for the anti-EU, anti-immigration flag hoisted by Britain's Brexit referendum on June 23rd. Look at what's happening in Europe, say the Trump people. They're turning away from liberal values and demanding a return to the homogenous state in reaction to the immigrant takeover. Well, not in the Netherlands, or at least nowhere near a majority. Not only did Wilders fail to achieve the alt-right breakthrough, But the rabidly pro-EU, pro-immigration Green Party jumped from 4 to 19 parliamentary seats. Led by the 32-year-old, curly-haired, telegenic Jesse Clavers, the Greens secured the youth vote when their leader told the BBC, "We're the opposite of Geert Wilders. He is hate, we are love." Wilders' defeat is also a blow for Marine Le Pen, the right-wing National Front candidate in the two-round April-May French presidential elections. Le Pen has been slipping in the polls, as centrist dark horse Emmanuel Macron has moved to just 1 point behind her. National Front failure to reach the second round of voting would be a major setback for Europe's far right and destroy any hopes for Germany's Alternative for Deutschland party in the autumn German elections. But back to Donald Trump and Steve Bannon. Why are they so opposed to the EU and its apparent liberal attitudes towards world trade, race issues and immigration? Because the failure of the EU and its rejection by the European electorate is justification for Trump's America First policy of walls, deportations, travel bans, cutbacks, increased defense spending, and tariff barriers. The interdependent hip thigh bone theory of the world is not acknowledged by Trump economists, but it is embraced by his political philosophers. Next Saturday, EU leaders gather in Rome for the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, which established the European Economic Community, forerunner of the European Union. The EEC grew out of the recognition that the only way to end the long history of disastrous European wars was to make member states economically and politically dependent on each other. For more than half a century, it looked as if the founders had succeeded. The continent became the world's #1 trading bloc and delivered peace and prosperity to its members. But it's been downhill since the banking crisis of 2008-2009. There are economic woes in Spain, Italy, Portugal, and most of all, Greece. Immigration fallout from a war-torn Middle East, and then, worst of all, Brexit. All of which has led people to voice the unspeakable. Can the EU survive? The 27 heads of government have been practicing their brave face looks for the Roman festivities. Following the Dutch elections, their task will be lightened. A bit.
Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints around the world with Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio and LookAheadNews.com. And as always, to remind you, go to the website LookAheadNews.com and sign up. No charge. You'll get tomorrow's news today. Tom, we were chatting about a few moments ago about the issue of Brexit and the European Union and the impact that the European Union is having on the world politic, as well as Europe and the individual countries making up the European Union. With about 5 minutes to go here, let's talk about several items. Russian participation in the Eurovision Song Contest. This is an interesting story. And
are you familiar with the Eurovision Song Contest?
No.
Eurovision Song Contest involves 43 nations around Europe, and also for some reason Australia and Israel. Uh-huh. I don't know why, but it's supposed to be the big unifying cultural event. It's a pop song contest, and last year, every year, the host is the people who won the previous year's competition. And last year it was won by the Ukraine. And they won with a song which attacked Russia for annexing the Crimea.
Right.
Okay, well, the Russians didn't like this. Uh-huh. And so they've been talking about boycotting the Eurovision Song Contest, which is going to be held in May in, of course, Kiev. All right?
Boycott. They're going to boycott in their own country. Okay.
No. Russians are going to boycott. No, Kiev is in Ukraine.
Ukraine. I'm sorry. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, but the Russians at the last minute have decided to send a wheelchair-bound singer. Right. She's quite beautiful, but stuck in a wheelchair. But the Ukrainians have discovered that she's been entertaining the troops in the Crimea, which is against their law. They can't have celebrities in Kiev who are entertaining people in the Crimea. And so it's going to be a real political showdown over what's supposed to be a unifying cultural event.
All right. I want to go back to something a moment ago I failed to mention. We were talking about the issue of the Ottoman Empire and, of course, Turkey. And I've got a note here from you, the beginning of the end of the caliphate. And, of course, that there is some relationship there. And that, of course, being the caliphate, having control over the region. And, of course, I would assume you're talking about ISIS?
Yes.
And what is the future of that?
Well, they reckon there's only about 100 or so ISIS people, followers, left in Mosul. And Raqqa could fall very quickly. And the reason is not only because they've hemmed them in and cornered them in Mosul, but they've lost control of all the territory which bordered Turkey. And it was through Turkey that they were getting their supplies, because it's a long, very difficult to control border. So it's a bit like a sieve through which the ISIS people could receive weapons, and also, just as importantly, they could send out oil tankers.
Right.
And they would sell that oil, and they would also send out artifacts and things like that, and they would sell those and use the money to buy weapons.
So see that things
it looks as if it's the beginning of the end
of the ISIS,
of the caliphate in Syria and Iraq.
All right,
not the end of ISIS, but the beginning of the end of the caliphate in Syria and Iraq.
All right, I want to move on to one other item, and they're kind of related. And of course, Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio with us, LookAheadNews.com, with a minute to go. Let's very quickly, are the folks in Europe paying attention to the events in North Korea? Yes or no?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Very much so. Of course, Rex Tillerson is, I think he's in South Korea now as we speak, or he's either in Japan or South Korea or in the air between the two.
And speaking of
he's going from South Korea to China, and there's only one topic, and that is North Korea.
Speaking of South Korea, with about 30 seconds to go, President Park's abandoned dogs?
Oh, yeah. Well, she's just been impeached. She's been thrown out, and next week they may even start formal criminal proceedings against her. But the big story is not that she's a criminal, but that when she left the presidential palace, she abandoned 7 dogs.
Oh, my goodness. All right. And that is the big story. How about that?
That's the big story.
Tom Arms. Tom, it's amazing what really is a striking issue in these various countries. Tom Arms, of course, joining us this afternoon. Look Ahead News, heard every Friday on this station and, of course, stations around the world, literally. And, of course, Look Ahead Radio, as heard here on the, I said Look Ahead News. Look Ahead Radio, heard on the program here every Friday. And LookAheadNews.com. Tom, as always, thank you very much for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Lockwood.
Viewpoints around the world.
Look Ahead Radio is a production of the Talk Station.